Today we're talking about the death of affordable cars and why it's getting harder and harder to buy a new car in 2025. And to do this, we're going to be talking about two dinosaurs that we have right here. These are two brand new vehicles that Ford Motor Company is killing off for 2025 and 2026. You have the Ford Escape and the Ford Edge. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about all of the different manufacturers, not just Ford Motor Company. But what I think is interesting is quite a few years ago, Ford Motor Company, GM, and quite a few other companies actually decided to kill off the cars, the smaller compact vehicles that were for sale. Now, there was a couple of different reasons for that. Number one was the profitability on those vehicles. You think about it, if you have a vehicle that you can sell for an MSRP of $17,000, a Ford Fiesta, there's not as much margin as a $100,000 pickup truck or a big old SUV, Expedition, things like that. On those more expensive vehicles, you have more room to hide the margin. By the way, margin's not a bad word. Profit is not a bad word. That's what makes the world go around and what allows Ford Motor Company, GM, and Ram to reinvest that money into better products for you and I to look at and enjoy. So don't be misinterpreted. Them getting rid of these smaller cars for profit is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. But the problem that happens with that is when you get rid of vehicles like the Taurus or the Chevrolet Impala or the Ford Fusion, the Focus, or the Fiesta, all of those vehicles. Once again, Chevrolet and Ram, they got rid of these vehicles as well. I just happen to know the Ford side in and out, like the back of my hand. You know, the downside to that is what happens to these affordable cars? Well, they got rid of the Ford Fiesta and then they said, okay, well, that's okay. We're going to replace it with some inexpensive vehicles that are SUVs. You can sit a little bit higher up off the ground. And what was sold to all of the Ford dealers and GM dealers is, okay, well, if you can have a Fiesta for this price, or you can have an EcoSport, which is about the same width in length and things like that, just sits up a little bit higher off the ground. What would you rather have? Maybe for an extra $2,000, you can have the SUV version of a Ford Fiesta. Oh, it makes a lot of sense. You've got the EcoSport. Well, the problem is Ford doesn't sell the EcoSport anymore. And the other problem is the Escape is now going to be done in 2025. At the end of this year, the Escape is gone unless they decide to extend it. The sad thing is the Edge, which is the least expensive mid-size SUV, it's gone. The 24s are it. You're not going to be getting a 25. So what does that leave us? That leaves us with the least expensive vehicle that Ford offers. Once again, Chevrolet is just as guilty, Ram is just as guilty. I just happen to know the Ford side of things. But the cheapest vehicle that you happen to have is a Bronco Sport, a Ford Maverick, which, by the way, those two vehicles are fantastic. The problem is that not everybody can afford a $30,000 or a $40,000 vehicle as an entry vehicle. I mean, crap is getting expensive nowadays. I mean, if you take a look at some of the news articles out there, it's quite ridiculous that we're talking about, because the average new car price in America for March of 2025 is nearly $49,000. That's the average. Keep in mind, you have a lot more that are more expensive and a lot more that are cheaper than that. That's the average. But what's crazier than that is that the new car prices haven't exactly fallen off the cliff like most people predicted they would in 2022. Because back then, the average new car price was $49,929. So you only have a $1,000 difference in selling price on average between the craziness that COVID shortages were in 2022 to now March of 2025. So it's not like the prices have fallen off the cliff. Yes, they've gone down $1,000 on average, but that's not that much in the grand scheme of things. Now, the other thing you have to keep in mind is what's going on with interest rates, because interest rates, in my opinion, are absolutely asinine. And to be speaking into specifics, you have got the average interest rate for a new car in 2025 is 8.64% APR. That's the average. Now, keep in mind that you have a lot of people that are buying subprime loans on that. So they might be paying 15 to 25% interest rate, maybe even higher, hopefully not, because that's, in my opinion, predatory. But at the end of the day, some people would rather pay that higher interest rate, and I don't care, I just need a car. But the good news is Ford is at least coming to the bat with a couple of examples. Now, keep in mind, this video, you might be watching it 12 months in the future, but at the time that I'm recording this video, Ford has actually got 72 months at 2.9 on the 24 F-150s and you can stack some rebates to go with that. So it starts to make a lot more sense, but that's a subvened rate. You know, I never thought we would be seeing 2.9 or 3.9 from some of these local credit unions, you know, but we did a few years ago. There's no telling what the current, political environment will yield as far as interest rates in the future. All I can do is report on today, but it's interesting to say the least on how an interest rate can factor in your payment. It drastically makes a difference in your overall payment. And speaking of payment, let's talk about the average price payment that you have on a new car payment is $742 a month is the average monthly payment on a new car in today's world. That's insane. And what's even more insane is that the average payment on a pre-owned used car is actually over $500 itself. So the pricing of these vehicles are absolutely getting out of hand. So my question to you is, how can we possibly fix this? Now, we're not going to get into politics, but at the end of the day, tariffs can play a big part on whether or not a vehicle is going to be priced competitively. If you have to import the steel or import the aluminum and there's a tariff on it, that's obviously going to affect the pricing of the vehicle. I'll just go ahead and tell you right now is we have a Mustang GTD on order, and I am very scared about that vehicle because I know what the vehicle's price point is. I actually can't say that publicly. Ford has asked me not to share that information. But if there's going to be a 25% tariff on that vehicle because it's actually constructed in Canada, that is a whole, let's just use the base MSRP that Ford has announced, which I think was $325,000. You add a 25% tariff on top of that, it starts to get out of control as far as the pricing is concerned. So I don't know if what's going to happen with that. This is not a political channel. This is not a political video at all. But you have to keep in mind that the cost of goods does affect what you can actually sell a vehicle for. So instead of me just sitting here complaining about all of the different things that's wrong with affordability on these vehicles, I think it's important that we maybe make some suggestions. Now, keep in mind, these are some redneck arithmetic suggestions because I'm just a good old boy from Alabama that sells cars and customize them. So, take everything that I'm saying with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, I think that I've been in this business long enough on the retail side that hopefully I'm dangerous enough that I can make some suggestions that might actually work. So the first thing is let's talk about the Escape. Yeah, I know it's going to be done at the end of 2025, but do you know where it's made? It's Mexico. Let's talk about the Bronco Sport. Fantastic vehicle, great price point. Could be a little bit lower, but good price point. You know where it's made? Mexico. All right, let's talk about the Ford Maverick. You want to guess where that one's made? You guessed it, Mexico. You want to talk about the Mustang Mach-E? Mexico. But the good news is that this is not a bash session for Ford because Ford Motor Company hires more auto workers in the United States than any other company out there. And so I'm very proud of that as a Ford dealer myself. So this is not like, hey, that Ford's doing a bad job. It's just at the end of the day, the lesser expensive vehicles, there's not enough margin to build them inside the United States. So hopefully Ford can find some kind of a way over a long period of time to drive the pricing down a little bit to make these vehicles more affordable. Because at the end of the day, this inflation problem is not just for the car business. Eggs are expensive, milk is expensive, everything in this world is expensive right now, and it's going to take some time to correct those specific things. But one of my biggest suggestions, I would love to see all of the cars that are consumed in America made in America. In addition to assembling the vehicles in the United States, I think it's also a good idea to source a lot of the materials inside of the United States. I get it, the cost of labor in the US is a little bit more or a lot more expensive than in other countries, but think about it, you won't have nearly as much money in shipping those products from around the globe to get to America for the assembly process. So maybe if everything is made in the United States, in addition to the vehicle being assembled, that might actually drive the cost down. But let me give you some practical things that you can do today to limit the cost of your vehicle today. That's probably why you're watching this video, is because crap is just too expensive right now. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you have your credit score in check. So if you're going to be financing the vehicle, the best thing to do would be to pay cash for it, but that's not reasonable for everybody. So number one, put as much cash down as you can, because that will lower the overall cost of interest, the borrowing of the money. It'll lower that down and make the payment that much cheaper. Sometimes you can actually get a better interest rate if you have a little bit of cash down, or a lot of bit of cash down when you finance that vehicle. In addition to that, kind of getting back to it, the credit score is vital, because if you've got a really good credit score, you can get underneath that average interest rate that we talked about earlier. And a 7% interest rate compared to a 15% interest rate is a drastic difference. And the only difference between those two, other than your payment being drastically higher, is you're just sending extra money to the bank every single month. And I get it, not everybody is in a situation where they can have the perfect credit score, but that really at the end of the day just goes into live below your means so you can get that better credit score, which will give you a better car payment on the exact same vehicle. And also keep in mind that the more cash you put down not only will reduce the interest rate, but it also directly correlates to a lower payment as well. The other thing you might want to consider is looking at other ways to finance the vehicle. So for instance, Ford Motor Company has a couple of different options. You can do 72 months, you can do 84 months. I don't recommend that, because that's not good overall the life of the loan, because you're going to be sending more money, once again, interest to the banks. So I would go with as low of a term as you possibly can. And by term, I mean, you don't want to extend the payments, 72 months, 84 months. Go with as short of a loan as you possibly can, while still being able to afford the payments, and then try and pay that vehicle off as fast as you possibly can, because that will reduce the overall cost to own that vehicle. But you need to consider other ways that might be beneficial to you. Like right now, you might be in a specific entry-level job and be expecting a pretty significant pay raise in the future. If that's the case for you, you might want to consider something that Ford calls their flex buy. And so the way that that works is, the first 36 payments of that loan is a whole lot less than the remaining 30 payments that you have, or how many ever months you decide to do it. But basically you have 2 tiers for payments, so that way you can have a lower payment at the beginning, but it does go up a little bit after you've had that vehicle for a little bit of time. The other thing you might want to consider, and I'm not saying it's good for every single person, but you might want to consider doing a lease. A red carpet lease through Ford Motor Company, depending on the vehicle and depending on the customer, the driving habits, and a lot of other things, it might actually save you money on a monthly payment, because like right now, the 24 F-150s are leasing like crazy right now. But the 25 F-150s are not leasing pretty much at all. They're obscenely expensive. And so you need to look at every single one of those payment options for you specifically. I've always had a saying, and I don't think I've ever said it on our YouTube channel, but I say it all the time in my life, is the person with the most information in a negotiation wins. Now, I'm not saying you're trying to over here negotiate with your dealer extra hard for a better deal. While that is important, in general in life, if you have more information, you can make a better decision. Usually when somebody screws up with a life decision, like buying a car or buying a house, they're making a decision with half of the information. They're not actually processing all of the variables. You need to be thinking 3 steps ahead. You need to play chess, don't play checkers. And with that said, what do you think is the best way for us as Americans to have more affordable vehicles? I want to know what you think down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and have a great day. Peace.